For months, Donald Trump and his team have tried to put questions about links to Russian interference in the election behind them. But that is now much tougher, with a stream of revelations about a meeting Donald Trump Jr. and other campaign officials held with Russian operatives last summer, expecting to get damaging information about Hillary Clinton. How does this affect the credibility of the Trump White House? And what does it mean for at least 4 investigations into possible collusion? Joining me now is Jay Sekulow, a member of the president's legal team. Jay, since the story first broke about possible links between the Trump campaign and Russia, the president and his team have repeatedly dismissed this as a hoax and fake news. Here are a few examples.
It's disgusting. It's so phony. That exactly goes to show you what the DNC and what the Clinton camp will do. They will lie and do anything to win.
I have nothing to do with Russia, and even for anything. What do I have to do with Russia?
Was there any contact in any way between Trump or his associates and the Kremlin or cutouts they had?
Of course not. Why would there be any contacts between the campaign?
The entire thing has been a witch hunt, and there is no collusion between certainly myself and my campaign, but I can always speak for myself and the Russians. Zero.
Jay, do you now acknowledge that all of those denials are, at the very least, suspect?
No, you've got to put them in context of what the president said and exactly what took place here, Chris. I think it's important to put the framework here. How did we end up with a special counsel? Here's how. The former FBI director, was the FBI director at the time, James Comey, had a series of meetings with the President of the United States. In those meetings, he took notes. He put them on his government computer, put them in his government desk, and when he was terminated from position, which he would acknowledge that the President had the authority to do, he gave them to a friend of his to leak to the press. So conversations he had with the President of the United States, he gives to a friend. Hold on a second, Chris.
I'm aware of the history, but this doesn't have anything to do with my question, which is whether or not there were contacts.
It has everything. Yeah.
Can you answer the question?
I'm going to answer your question.
Does this?
I am, and you're going to let me answer it. So I'm going to finish what I was saying.
It depends how long we're going to take to get there.
Not long, Chris. He leaked the information for one purpose and one purpose only to his friend, and he said to get a special counsel, and a special counsel is appointed. So the entire premise upon which this entire investigation has been based was based on illegally leaked information, including conversations with the President of the United States. And today it's announced that James Comey has signed a book deal where he's going to discuss all this. So you tell me, you think that's okay?
I'm not asking you about any of that. I'm asking you
yes,
about...
Yes, you did. You said, do I think...
Wait a minute, Jay. You said, let me let you finish. Now let me finish. The question I'm asking you is very simple. The president, his vice president, his son repeatedly denied any contacts with the Russians. Given what we've learned this week about the contact between a number of top campaign officials, including the president's son, are all those denials that it's just fake news and a hoax, are those suspect?
I just answered the question on why the president's statements have been clear on what this was involving in his view, and I gave you just now the analysis on how, in fact, this investigation started. And
which is not a question I asked, but let's go, if we can, to
Chris, let's not go through that again. It was the question you had.
No, it wasn't. The question I asked you, Jay, is whether or not the denials are suspect. I didn't ask you about James Comey.
I do not think the denials are suspect. I do not think the denial by the President of the United States is suspect at all.
Here is the email exchange in June of 2016 between Don Jr., setting up the meeting between Don Jr. and the Russians. Rob Goldstone writes, the Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father, Aras, this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump. Don Jr. responds, if that's what you say, if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. Doesn't that contradict the denial of any contact between the Trump campaign and the Russians?
No, I mean, what it states was that there was going to be a meeting, and you said the Russians. This was a lawyer who was Russian. This was a lawyer who ended up was Russian. And what took place at that meeting, and it's been well reported, and you've reported this as well, the discussions involved the Maginski Act and Russian adoptions. It was quickly ended. It was in the middle of a campaign. And look, this idea that it may have involved opposition research, which never materialized evidently, the fact is, the Ukrainians at the very same time were working with the DNC and the Clinton campaign to give what? Opposition research on Donald Trump and his associates. So everybody's acting as if okay, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, doesn't it indicate, you say, well, it was a meeting about adoption. We'll get to that in a moment. But the fact of the matter is, the reason that Don Jr. went into that room and Jared Kushner went into that room and Paul Manafort went into that room was not to talk about adoption. It's because they had been promised, they'd been promised by Rob Goldstone that there would be information as part of the Russian government's effort to tip the election to President Trump.
Yeah, and of course, nothing in that meeting that would have taken place, even if it was about the topic of an opposition research paper from a Russian lawyer, is illegal or a violation of the law. And by the way, I am not the only lawyer, and you know this, Chris. Most lawyers, many, I'd say a vast majority of the lawyers that you've interviewed and others have interviewed on your network and other networks have acknowledged that the meeting itself and those proposed discussions would not have been a violation of the law.
But the point is, it does show intent, willingness, perhaps not actual collusion, because apparently, and in fact, none of us know what really went on in the meeting, but assuming that, at least on that point, everybody is telling the truth, doesn't it show intent and willingness on the part of Don Jr. and Jared and Paul Manafort to collude with the Russians? And let me just point out, Natalia Veselnitskaya was not just some Russian off the street. She had close ties to people in the Kremlin.
Well, number one, if there was the discussion was going to be about, if it was going to be about Russian opposition research that a Russian lawyer had, the fact is those goes on. You know that goes on in campaigns all the time. Opposition research is a big part of campaigning.
It doesn't go on with the Russians all the time, Jay.
Well, no, but look, here's what happened. First of all, nothing happened. There ended up being no exchange of information. But in and of itself, that meeting, the relevancy of the differential that you're just put forward, the relevancy of whether it was a Russian lawyer or other individuals that Donald Trump Jr. knew, the fact is what took place during that meeting, even on the basis of these emails as Donald Trump Jr. laid them out, were not violations of a statute. So when you talk about Russian collusion, colluding to do what? Colluding to violate what law?
Well, let's talk about the legality of the meeting. The U.S. Code, and let's put it up, bars a foreign national from giving money or, quote, thing of value in connection with an election, and it bars anyone from soliciting such assistance. Wasn't the Trump campaign, in agreeing to that meeting, not talking about what happened, but what they thought when they went into that meeting, wasn't it soliciting something of value, which was the Kremlin, as they believed it, the Kremlin's effort to tip the election to Donald Trump?
Well, number one, they didn't solicit the meeting, and you know that by reviewing the emails.
But they agreed to it, and they agreed to it. And in fact, Donald Trump said, I love it, and he agreed to the meeting on the 25th floor of Trump Tower.
The opposition research, if it would have materialized, is not a thing of value. There's never been a case that has said that opposition research is a thing of value. And by the way, there's been FEC lawyers, Federal Election Commission lawyers, that have talked about that as well. So I think, Chris, you don't conflate. I don't think it's appropriate to conflate the exact transaction as it was laid out in those emails, which was not a solicitation by the Trump campaign to get information, was an offer of opposition research. Compare that to what took place with the Ukrainians and the DNC, where they were working in collusion with each other, or when the DNC was leaking to one of the other networks the questions that they were going to ask during the debates. So everyone's acting as if there's this massive collusion statute that only applies here. The fact is there is no collusion statute.
Well,
period.
I mean, there are a couple of points here, and one of them is that you seem to be sliding over the fact that this wasn't CNN that was giving questions to Hillary Clinton. This was, according to the offer that was being made by Rob Goldstone, this was the Kremlin, a hostile power, offering information. Christopher Wray, the president's own FBI director nominee, saw it this way. Take a look.
To the members of this committee, any threat or effort to interfere with our elections from any nation state or any non-state actor is the kind of thing the FBI would want to know.
He's not saying any actual
Right.
interference. He's saying any offer is something the FBI would want to know. Would you agree that Donald Jr. and Jared and Paul Manafort should have notified the FBI?
List what Chris Wray just said. It would be he would investigate any type of involvement of interference. The President of the United States has said precisely the same thing. He said that on multiple occasions. You could go back and check the record on this. The President said to James Comey, if satellites were doing something, remember that whole statement? But here, what do you have? What took place between what we know took place was not a violation of the law. There's not a violation of the law. The question is Russia's other engagement on a global scale as directed to the United States. That's being investigated. And the president has asked Vladimir Putin himself about that, talked to him about that on multiple occasions when they were just at the G20. So this idea that that what Chris Wray said is somehow inconsistent with what the president said, I think is a false narrative. It's not true. They're not inconsistent statements. Go ahead.
You began this interview by going after James Comey for leaking information, for writing a book.
Yeah.
In our last interview last month, you were sharply critical of James Comey, and I want to play some of that for you.
I can't discuss that and would not discuss that with you. Unlike James Comey, who leaks information to the press, I actually respect the attorney-client privilege. Apparently, he did not.
Jay, you said that a couple of times in that interview. Let me ask you, what attorney-client privilege exists between the president and the FBI director?
Well, there's the presidential executive privilege, and there's the deliberative privilege. So there's two privileges that actually apply there.
You would agree there's no attorney-client privilege?
Well, James Comey's an attorney. But in the case of his conversations,
he's not acting as an attorney. He's acting as the FBI director,
right.
and he doesn't work as the personal. He doesn't work as the personal attorney for the president.
No, of course not.
Well, okay,
right.
so that.
But he held it, Chris. I want to be clear. He has an executive privilege. No one denies that there was a privilege that existed between the President of the United States and James Comey willfully, without the consent of the White House or the President, released information that was covered by that privilege.
But he doesn't. The point I'm trying to make, Jay, is
illegal.
That when you suggest that James Comey violated attorney-client privilege, that really misunderstands the role of the FBI director. He's not the President's private lawyer.
Chris, I have the attorney-client privilege, and that's what the context of what I said. I have the attorney-client privilege. Unlike James Comey, I respect the attorney-client privilege, as James Comey should have respected the executive privilege and the deliberative privilege that he waived, which he had no authority to do, in order to get, evidently, a special counsel and a book deal.
One final question. Well, he got the book deal because he got fired by the president. Do you think it's okay that in the book deal, according to the press reports, that he's going to go into details on his conversations with the president? You think that's good? You think that's okay? You know, I ask the questions, you answer them, Jay. Let me ask you one final question.
Yeah, but you don't want to answer that one. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Let me ask you one final question, and I hope you can answer this. Who's paying you and all of the outside lawyers?
So I am retained by the main law firm that's involved in the representation of the president, and that is the Kasowitz firm. I'm retained of counsel. So our billing that I would do for this kind of case goes to his firm, and they pay us.
Yes, but you're kind of ducking the question. Who's paying them?
No, I don't.
Well,
I'm not
obviously, Mark Kasowitz isn't paying you. Who's paying them?
That situation is between Mr. Kasowitz's firm and whoever's paying them, whatever entity's paying them. We're subpaid by we're just of counsel. So I can't give you. I'm not in privity of contract, as we say in the law, with the person that's paying, or the organization that's paying the bills to the Kasowitz firm.
Do you know if President Trump is personally paying for his private legal defense? Because the reason I ask is there's talk that the campaign committee is paying. There's talk about an effort to have the RNC pay. So this is an issue.
Yeah, but that's none of those would be illegal or outside the norm. I mean, that happens in these cases.
I'm just trying to
I can't answer your question because I don't know. Yeah, well, I'm not in privity of contract, as we say, with the party that's responsible for the actual payment of the bill. I'm just of counsel to the Kasowitz firm for the purposes of this case.
Well, Jay, I think it went better than last time, and we're going to still keep trying to get this.
Look, I don't mind a good joust. A good joust is all right, even early in the morning.
Jay, thank you. Thanks for your time this Sunday.
Thanks, Chris.